This is a shir number 5 of a 6-part series of shiurim and Birchat hachamah. The schedule of Birchat hachamah is fascinating. There's a very famous machlokas Tanaim between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua as to when exactly the world was created. Rabbi Eliezer feels the world was created in Tishrei. Rabbi Yoshua believes the world was created in Nisan. Is Rosh Hashanah the new year, or is Rosh Chodesh Nisan, based on the pasuk in Parshas Bo, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodeshim, the beginning of the new year? Obviously in halacha, it's hard to really know exactly what happened historically. For different areas of halacha, we treat Tishrei as the start of the new year, and classically and traditionally, we lace Rosh Hashanah davening with references to the fact that it is the start of a new year. Hayom haras olam, Hayom yamid b'mishpat, kol yitzirei olamim. On the other hand, there are certain areas in which we treat Nisan. Certainly we count months. Nisan Iyar Tishrei, Nisan is the first month. We refer to it as the first month, Rosh Chodeshim. And the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah primarily divvies up all different halachos, some of which see Tishrei as the start of the new year, some of which see Nisan as the start of the new year. Whether we feel that we have the flexibility to treat two different points as the start, obviously it was the first year of creation, or there's another approach, a very fascinating approach adopted by the Rabbeinu Tam, Rashi's grandson, in a Tosos in Rosh Hashanah, Chav Zayin Amud Aleph, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu intended the world in Tishrei, Allah b'machshava, but it was actually created in Nisan. Either way, halacha sees either of these two starting points as options. For Birchat hachamah, for some very interesting reason, we choose Nisan as the point of installation, as the moment we choose to remember each 28 years and to recite Oseh Ma'aseh Bereishis when the sun reaches that point of origin. Tishrei is the birth of a universe. Whether HaKadosh Baruch Hu intended it or actually created it, there's the universalism of Chodesh Tishrei. The Gemara in Rosh Hashanah describes that when we sign contracts, and we want to date contracts based on what year of that particular king's reign or dynasty it may be. So for Gentile kings, we date it based on the month of Tishrei. So if, let's say, he ascended the throne in the summer, and we're writing a shtar after Sukkot, we'll say this is the second year of that king's reign because a Tishrei has passed, and that inaugurates a second year. There's a transition. Nisan, of course, is the start of history, redemption, and redemptive history of the Jewish people, the unique history of Am Yisrael, not just to live as part of nature, as part of this universe, but to improve the world, to bear the heavy burden of being God's selected people, and ultimately to struggle towards the ultimate redemption of mankind and of this world. We would think, that Tishrei would be the more appropriate of the two starting points for the installation of the sun, to remember that first year of the sun's being installed. After all, we typically associate the sun with a universalism as opposed to the moon, which has a parochialism. For example, we cite during Kiddush Levana, based on several midrashim, Sheim asidim lischadesh kimosa ulifa'er liyosam al shem kivod malchusa, that Am Yisrael is like a moon, that it ultimately will be renewed and rejuvenated based on the medrash that HaKadosh Baruch Hu reduced the size of the moon. At the beginning of time, HaKadosh Baruch Hu converted it into Mar HaKatan as opposed to the sun, Mar HaKadol. And this reduction of the size and the stature of the moon, a stature reduction which will be reversed in Messianic times, Miros HaMashiach, is representative, is symbolic of the Jewish Odyssey, where during different points of history, our stock has fallen, our size has been diminished, but we believed that ultimately we will become once again seen and recognized as God's people, as the voice of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as the emissary of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as the example of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's will in this world, that the entire world will recognize that. So the sun is universalism, has a cosmological sweep to it, whereas the moon is more parochial and national towards Am Yisrael, a very famous medrash. The Yaakov counts for the moon, Esav counts based on the sun. And indeed, most nations, not all, follow solar-based calendars, whereas the Jews, amongst us, some others, follow a lunar-based calendar, a lunar calendar. Yaakov, Mona, Lelevana, Shiktana. The Levana, for example, never really sets. It just fades out of sight because it's eclipsed by the sun, and this is also a metaphor for Jewish history, that the Jewish people never really decline or never really disappear, but sometimes they're eclipsed by other empires, as opposed to the sun, which actually doesn't really set, but it dips beneath the horizon. The moon doesn't really dip, it just becomes eclipsed. So we would think that Nisan is a month for Jewish history, for Chag Pesach, for the moon, for Chodesh Zelachem, and an event which celebrates or recognizes the reinstallation of the sun based on its original point of origin. That experience should be affixed, should be tethered to Chodesh Tishrei, not to Chodesh Nisan. And yet, we select Chodesh Nisan. And this year, there's a special irony. There's a unique irony to this fusion, because it's not just Chodesh Nisan, it's not just some Wednesday in Chodesh Nisan or Tuesday night Wednesday, but it's actually the Wednesday of Erev Pesach. So there's a fusion between universal history, as represented by the sun, and Jewish redemptive history, as not just captured, but as launched by Pesach. Pesach was the launch of Jewish history. Jewish history was conceived on Har Moriah, Bris Bein Absarim, and 400 years later it was actually launched the night of Pesach, the night of Kadosh Baruch Hu extricated us from Mitzrayim. And it's a very powerful image. A Jew has to live both his universalism and his parochialism. Sometimes we become too narrow in our approach. We concern ourselves solely with Jewish needs, and there's almost sometimes a xenophobia that sets in, especially amongst people sometimes who feel that Judaism so deeply, so powerfully. There's a dismissiveness and a derogation towards others, and we lose sight of the fact that we share this planet with 5 billion other people, and their lives are meaningful, and our lives are dedicated towards the improvement and the transformation of their lives morally as well as materially. There are some Jews some people sometimes face the opposite danger with their universalism, this universal ethic. They're all humans, and all of our values are equivalent, and all religions are equal in legitimacy, and somehow their unique sense and vision of the Jewish mission, of the Jewish challenge, of the Jewish journey itself becomes effaced. And we have to find that balance. We have to strike that balance between our universal warrant and sensitivity to broader global membership and our unique honor and responsibility as a Jew. And the twinning of Birchat hachamah and Chodesh Nisan in many ways captures this blend, that we select the sun, which serves as such a global, not just global, but cosmological and universal icon, and we fasten it to Chodesh Nisan, we append it to Chag Pesach, and even in Tanakh there are several instances in which the sun, again, as opposed to the moon, a seeming symbol of such universal experience, becomes converted into a Jewish symbol. There's a pasuk in Yeshaya, a pasuk I quoted in section 3, shiur number 3, v'chafra halavana, uvo hachamah, daliyatzid lavo, the sun and the moon will be dimmed and blunted, and Chazal interpret that it will be dimmed and blunted for Gentile nations, but the Jews will have the constant light of the sun. A pasuk in Yirmiyah, which likens the stability and the impregnability of the Jewish experience to the inalienability of the sun. Ko Amar Hashem, this is Yirmiyah Parak Lamed Aleph. Nosein Shemesh L'or Yomam, HaKadosh Baruch Hu places the sun in the sky to provide light. Chukos Yerech v'Kochavim L'or Laila, and the other planets as well. Im Yamushu HaChukim Ha'ela, if these laws, of these systems of astronomy will ever be suspended, and they won't, Num Hashem Gam Zera Yisrael Yishbesu Miyos Goy Lefanai Kol Yamim, so the Jewish experience will also terminate, namely just like these planets are fixed and interminable and eternal, as it were, until Limas Mashiach. Similarly, the experience of the Jewish people. There's a beautiful medrash in Bereshis Rabbah surrounding the events in Parshas Vayetze. In Parshas Vayetze, Yaakov is traveling, and Vayifga b'makom vayalan sham kiva shemesh. So suddenly he has to sleep unexpectedly at Har Moriah because the sun has set unnaturally, seemingly kiva shemesh. He hadn't been planning on it, and the language of Vayifga b'makom suggests there's a certain surprise, there's a certain unexpectedness. So here the sun sets on behalf of Yaakov and ultimately on behalf of Jewish history, so that Yaakov can dream and establish a Beit El and the Matzeva. And then in Parshas Vayishlach, the Medrash says the time was made up because there the sun, Vayizrach lo Hashemesh, the sun rose earlier than its natural time to heal Yaakov. So the sun, which is so fixed and so universal, becomes not just a symbol, but an accessory for Jewish history, in the case of Yaakov Avinu. And by reciting Birchas HaLavana during the month of Nisan, we're trying to capture that sense that HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates universal objects, universal forces, and we have to participate in those universal forces, but ultimately the purpose of our universe is to be redeemed and to be animated by the unique role of Jewish history.